since you're talking about SmartID, I'll just start with some basics on this to give you some more detailed information why we created this and what is this about. Basically, the concept of the SmartIDs is to have some flexible and stable component recognition without nodes saving any recognition criteria, which we had like with the, let's say, basic or the old traditional recording of components in the Windows and Components tree. And also the idea is to keep simple things simple. We will see this, how it's meant to be. Just to go some steps back, since you all use QF test already, you all are familiar with this component nodes. Like imagine you record a click on a button. In this case here, it's OK button, which was recorded. And you always get this component recorded and stored under the Windows and Components tree. And in there, QF test is storing all the information which are necessary to find the component afterwards. So basically, we have here a class which QF test uses. So it's either a button, a checkbox, combo box, text field, whatever. And then some additional information is stored, like the name of the component, which is some developer set attribute, which the developers can directly set in the source code of your application, whether it's a web application, a Swing application, a FX application, it doesn't matter. And besides this internal name, which is sometimes not that readable, like in this sample here, where we have an OK button, could be also some cryptical stuff. Besides this, we have the feature, which is also for a button, it's the label, which is directly displayed on the button itself. And for other components, there are also here some extra features. In this case, since it's just a simple button, we just have the QFS label OK. For others, there might be other additional information, like for images, there would be the image hash of a specific image or whatever in there. Then additionally to this, we have the index of the component, like the structure, like which component, which class index the component is. In this case, the button is the third out of 5 buttons in this specific panel where it is displayed. And besides this, we also have the geometry as an information to find the component. But since you already use QF test, if you have a component which is just some valid geometry information and all the other information, like there's no name set, no feature set. Also, the class index is not that useful. If you're just relying on geometry, or even if you're just relying on structure, your test is kind of error prone, because whenever the geometry changes, like you're running the test on another machine which has a larger resolution, something like this, or the structure, if the button is moved a bit in the application, the structure may also change. So if you just rely on this, it's not that the recognition is not that stable. So you always need to try to find some name or feature, some unique parameters to find the components. And then we have this additional QF test ID up here, which is just some auto-generated ID. And this one is then used for referencing the component in the actual actions. Like we could see here, we have our hierarchy in the application, like some Windows and components, for example, a web page with some dialog in it. In there's a panel and there's our button. And here we have the class, so it's a button. And also you have the QF test ID, which is basically just referencing from the tree down here up here. So basically, if I replay this, QF test looks where this information for this OK button is stored. It looks in this Windows and Components tree and finds this button. And then out of this, it takes all the recognition criteria and uses this to find the component. Since this was, let's say, time-consuming, or also had some maintenance effort, if you have larger applications with a lot of components in there and there was something changing, it was kind of time-consuming, or even erroneous. And to make your life a bit simple, we also supported this creation of generic components, which is basically some approach to create your own custom component in the Windows Components tree. For example, you create some generic button where you simply just say, okay, the class should be a button. You don't have any feature or name there. The only thing which is used for recognition is the label on the button itself. So basically what you do is inside here, use a variable. And this one, you can then define dynamically whether you want to click the OK button or any other button. So out of this, you can use this generic button inside a procedure. So imagine you have a procedure click button. Inside this procedure, you're referencing this component which you just created on your own. And inside this one, you have here this label parameter, which you can then set as a parameter for the procedure call. Like here, you set label to OK, and then the procedure call looks like this, click button. Okay, so this one is then referring to an OK button on the page. And if you want to click on another button, you simply call the same procedure, and the only thing you need to modify is the label to whatever, save, cancel, whatever button you want to click. So you don't need to record each and every of the buttons in your application, which is already an advantage. You don't need to mess up with all the windows and components down there. And the problem of this is that you have, like in QFTest, all these components are having some parent or some main component around it, whether it's a dialog or window or something like this. So you also need to define which topmost parent component is around it. So in this case here, for example, if you have a button and the button is inside some kind of dialog, you additionally would need to create some generic dialog and also there make one parameter dynamic using QFTest variable syntax, put in here a dialog name, and then you pass this dialog name, for example, vehicles dialog, also as a parameter to this procedure to tell QFTest, please click the OK button in this and this specific dialog. So this would also work, but let me show it here on the next, no, it's not in here. But this, the problem of this is that you need to create this for a dialog, which is the topmost component. You would also need to create this for a window where you have a button in there, since it's another top-level component around it. And also, you may need to create this for several specific classes. Like for buttons, you need a generic button. For text field, you may need to create a generic text field, stuff like this. And you also need to take into account some parent and child connections, which make it not that easy. So let's come to the pros and cons of this generic components, which was already improving compared to the normal components. It's a bit more lean and clear in the component tree. You have just your generic components. We can mix this together with traditional components. You can even like implement your tests without component recording. Imagine you have another button and you have this click button procedure. You simply modify the name or the text, the label on the button which you want to click and call the same procedure. So you don't need to record each and every button. It's also giving you a good readability of the procedure calls, because if you look here, call procedure, click button, OK, and this button OK is clicked on the vehicle style because quite readable. Besides this, the cons is that you need to create generic components for each class. Like for a text field, you need another generic component than for a button or a combo box or whatever. And you need to create a generic component for each criteria. So the one we had here is just using a dynamic label. If you want to rely on the name, you would either create another one or create one generic procedure with two generic component with all the two parameters. So it's a bit more effort, and you need to create this for each and every criteria and each and every class. Also, the one with structure and hierarchy, like dialog panel, I just explained. And also an advantage is that you just need to maintain this if there are changes with the search and replace in QFTest. There may also be performance issues when using labels, because it's, let's say, QFTest needs more effort to determine the labels out of the component, because they may not be stored directly in the component information itself. There may be some components around it. And also a disadvantage is that you have a reduced number of recognition criteria. You can see here, if you just put in this one to find a component and you don't have the name and any extra features, you get, let's say, less or a reduced number of parameters which QFTest can use to find the component. And you always need to make sure that you have the right attributes or criteria which is matching. So let's say, as I wrote in the first sheet, to simplify this a bit, we thought about our traditional components and also about a generic components approach, how we could simplify this for our end users. And then we defined this SmartID. So basically, SmartID is you can put one or more recognition criteria from all the available criteria. I just showing you like name, like feature, like extra features, even index or generic class you could use in there to tell QFTest which one you want to use. And another one is that you don't need any component nodes recorded in the Windows and Components tree, because the criteria you're using are directly stored at the action you want to replay. We will see this later on the demo, and it's also here on this sample table. For example, if you want to click on an OK button, then you can simply put in a mouse click. Then this hash you see here at all the actions is basically the magic marker for QFTest that tells QFTest after this hash there's a SmartID following. And then you have several possibilities to define the SmartID. The simplest one would be to simply put in, for example, the text which is displayed on the button. So you simply write hash OK, and then QFTest is looking for any component which has OK on it. If there's not only a button with OK on it, for example, there's another component, whatever, a label or any other type of component with OK on it, then this may already not work as expected, because then it may hit a different component than the one you're expecting. So therefore, you have some possibilities to, for example, prepend the class name in the SmartID. So you basically can then say hash button :OK, which tells QFTest, okay, I'm looking for a button, and the button should be identified via OK, which may be the label on the button, maybe the name of the button itself, or any other attribute in the component. So we have here several possibilities which you could use. We could also say we want to match the name, we want to match the feature. We can use some indexes, like I want to click on a button and the button should be the third one, because QFTest is always working 0 index based, which is this one here, like hash button : and then the 2 in the brackets would mean click on the third button in my application, which is, let's say, not that unique. It's kind of good guessing which one would it be, because later on the developers changed the layout a bit and this wouldn't work. But it's just a way you could use to address a component. Then we have additional ones, like here, for example, if you want to click a specific tab in a tab panel, you simply write hash tab panel : and then add, and then tab 1 is equal to the text which is displayed on the tab. So this is also working. Like we have other combinations. And we even support like regular expressions on this. So for example, if you want to click on a button which is either OK with capital letters or has the O as capital letter and the K as a small letter, then you could write hash %, which tells QFTest there's some regex following it. And then you say either it should be OK or OK with a small k. So you can support, for example, 2 versions of your application with just a simple regex there, or any other construct. If you don't want to type the full name of a large label or something like this, you can also use regular expressions. And also a good thing here, like you see the screenshot here, there is no information stored in the Windows and Components tree. All the information is just stored in the action itself. We will also see this later on the demo. And how does this mechanism, let's say, work? basically, if you provide just some parameter, like here on top, if you just write hash OK, or even if you want hash button double colon OK, then what QFTest does, it does a first level search, because we identified the name is one of the most unique parameters of a component. Basically, first, what's QFTest doing in the first level search? It's looking for a component which is matching this name. And if there's no name found with this criteria redefined, it's going for a second level search and is then checking if there's a component matching this label or matching this feature. So basically looking if there's any component which has a visible text on it with this specific criteria I provided. And even if this is not matching, QFTest is doing another round, doing a third level search, and then looking for components of the class label. This can be, as it's written here, can be changed via options. So if you have an application and you know there's not any component which has a valid name or useful name set, then you can simply skip the first level search and tell QFTest, I want to rely on labels or any other attribute. I want to just go for this search, which is then even speeding up your object recognition. Let's come to the pros and cons for SmartID as well. As I said, there's no component tree recorded because all the action is just stored in the actions itself. You even have the possibility to implement your tests without component recording, like the same like we have with generic components. It's also we having good readability of the nodes, and we can explicitly define which criteria we want to use. Remember back with the generic components, there we always needed to make sure whether we want to rely on a name or on a feature for each and every of this component. With the SmartIDs, you can directly say for each and every action, you can define this OK button I want to find by the name, and this save button I want to find by the label, and this text field I want to find by the label which is on top of the component or something like this. The cons obviously more or less the same. Like generic components, we have also maintenance is just possible via search and replace, but this is not the big issue because in QFTest we have a very powerful search engine where you can even say I want to look for any attribute in my tests, and based out of this I get some search results, and then you could, for example, use this search result and doing just in the scope of this search result, doing an additional second level search just based on this first search result, which kind of simplifies then this search and replace. And in my opinion, is even the same powerful. It's just another way to work with your components. The performance is more or less the same when you're using labels. As I said, it's sometimes hard to determine the label based on the application or how it is implemented. And also, I get a reduced number of recognition criteria, so I always need to make sure, for example, to at least put the class in front of it, because just writing hash OK will work in QFTest, but writing hash button double colon OK, it's like gives QFTest some more knowledge about the component. It also is a bit more readable for your co-workers, because if they have just hash OK, could be any component in the application, and they need to visually look about the whole application to find out which component was meant. If you have there, for example, button double colon OK, then it's clear it should be a button, and then this button should be clicked. And you can use this SmartID approach like for all your normal tests, and you can ignore the component hierarchy completely. You get a lot of readability in your tests. You can even go for test-driven development if, for example, you have some mock-up of your application, which is just some visual printout or whatever, and you know that there, for example, if you take a login screen, if you have a username field, a password field, and a login button and a cancel button, then you could create your test, because then you could simply write hash text field double colon username and some value which you want to enter there, and then hash text field :password, put in the value there, and then hash button :login. And because you don't need to record any of the action, you can simply type it down or copy and paste it together and create already working test cases without any existing application. You can use this for keyword-based testing. You can also integrate it with test tools, for example, robot framework, stuff like this. And you can even do some cross-technology tests. Imagine you're coming from a Java FX or Java Swing application and you want to move to a web application. And let's say the login dialog or any other module in your application is more or less consisting of the same components. So let's say you have a login screen in your Java FX application, which has username, password, and login button. You may have the same in your web application, and if you created your test using SmartIDs, you can simply run the same test for Java FX and then for web with the same test script, because the SmartID is just relying on the class name and the name of the field. And if those are the same, you don't even need to change anything in your test. And to improve this a bit more, since we said the performance is not that good if you need to search over the whole entry masks and stuff like this, we introduced the scope concept in here, where you can say, I have some container component, like whether it's a window, a dialog, a panel, and I want to just search in this specific panel for my component, which limits the range of QF-test in which QF-test will search for the address component. So with this, you get a faster component recognition, and also the test is a bit better readable. I will show you this in the demo afterwards, how this is displayed in QF-test. And with setting the scopes, it's simply done via defining a doc tag with add scope, and then whether a SmartID or a QF-test ID of a component in the comment field of any node, and then this scope is set. And if the node is entered, this scope is set for the specific action. And if the node you're replaying is then left at the end, the scope is automatically reset. So you don't need to take care about removing the scope again and telling QF-test to look at everything again after you set some scope. This is all done automatically. We even have some implicit scopes for dialogs and pop-ups. Imagine you have some dialog popping up in your application, so QF-test is automatically setting some search scope on this dialog, because the most necessary or most recent action after popping up a dialog will probably be some action in the dialog. Otherwise, it makes no real sense. You can even customize this, but by default, it's then automatically setting a scope on the dialog, and then the next action is going to take part in the dialog. And if the dialog is closed at the end, this implicit scope is automatically reset. You can nest the scopes together, which I will show also in the demo afterwards. You can leave a scope, as I explained, when exiting a node where we're setting a scope. This is possible. You can also, if you have a sequence, and in the sequence you want to have just one step without a scope, you can simply put in a no scope doc tag in there, which is, for example, sometimes necessary if you have some combo box with a list in it, and sometimes depending on how it's implemented, the list is not a child element of the combo box itself because it's displayed somewhere else. Then you can simply set a no scope, and then QF-test is finding the elements in there. So let's go to the next one. This I will show you in the demo itself. And one thing is, if QF-test finds out that the SmartID would be too complicated, then it will automatically record a traditional component node. This you couldn't customize via the QF-test options, but as we said, we want to keep simple things simple. The SmartID is normally just meant for basic or quite simple readable stuff, and if it gets too complicated, a real QF-test component might be a better option. So as I said, life's always better than PowerPoint. Let's switch to my demo where I can show you this. Basically, I'm using this car config web test suite, which is in your installation of QFTest. If my QFTest looks a bit different than yours, it's because I'm using here QFTest 7.0 minus development, which is the actual development snapshot right now. This is just because I want to show you some additional feature we are introducing with this 7.1, which is going to be released this week or one of the next weeks, or maybe next week. But the plan right now is to release it this week. So then you can also try this out. What I do is I simply start up some client. In my case, it's now a web application. But the same approach you could use for any other supported engine QFTest, whether it's Java Swing, FX, Windows applications, Android, whatever. The mechanisms are the same, and you can use this in each and every of the steps. So let me resize this a bit. So basically, this is our web application, and what I could do now, here I have my normal components. Let's say, for example, I have here my vehicle table. All the components are stored in here, like the base price, all the fields, which are like the normal components with all the component information on the left side. And if I want to rely just on the SmartIDs and don't want to go for recording the normal components, I can simply say in here, one sec, I need to open this up. So, and I want to say here, let's say I take a mouse event and I want to enter this mouse event. For example, I want to click here in the discount field. So I simply write hash discount, and let's replay this as a hard event, so you see that it's working. We already see that the highlight is working, so QFTest is finding this component. We can click there, and then let's say we copy and paste this together and transform it to a text input node, and here let's say we enter, my keyboard is blocking, one sec, to go to meeting window overlays, blocking a bit my keyboard entry. Would be too easy if this would work. It's not working. Oh no, I got the cursor again. I don't know why the cursor was left. Sometimes the overlay of GoToMeeting is blocking the actions. So if I replay this, both steps, like the mouse click in hash discount and the input of hash discount, this is clicking there and entering the tab. Okay, or maybe need to remove the entry before. So this is working. I could do the same, for example, if I want to trigger something in the menu up here. So let's say you copy and paste this and simply say I want to click on options, and then I want to click on vehicles. So I simply copy and paste this together. Then there are 3 dots following at the end here. So if we reload those both steps, that is working the same. I could then go into this entry mask here and also simply type the parameters I have in here. So let's say I want to click on this one, and then I enter here some value. Then this would also work as expected. And at the end, let's say right now, simply click, one sec, copy, paste, and let's say to keep it simple, click the OK button. Keyboard is again blocking. I don't know why. Now it's working. let's say we click on the cancel button, something like this. And then, for example, if we replay this whole sequence, it's working the same. Also here my cancel would work. And as I said, the main advantage of this is one thing, it's more readable. And the other thing is I could simply cut this out and put to any test suite I want to. And I don't have any windows and components down here. And this will still work as expected because all the information necessary is just stored in this actions itself. As I said, what I would recommend also to make it a bit more readable, to at least prepend the class names of the components in here. If I get my keyboard back, I don't know what GoToMeeting is doing here. Sorry. No focus of my keyboard. It's not connected to the QFTest version. Here I get the focus. There's the focus again. What I at least would recommend to put in here the class names of the component at the beginning to make this a bit more, let's say, readable. Also here, let's say this is also text field. So I'm basically preparing just the class name. And this would be a button cancel, which gives QFTest some additional information so it knows which class is needed to it's working on, which speeds up the object recognition. And also as a coworker, I know, okay, this click should be on some menu items, or I need just to look at the menu item. I see options, okay, it should be here. If I have then here in the dialog, I have then here some button like this or a text field, okay, I need to enter some value in the text field, and the text field has some criteria regal name, which in this dialog obviously could just be this one, which gives you some more information or makes it even a bit more readable. As I said, we can even use regular expressions in here. If you want to get rid of those three dots here at the end, I can also say I put in a regular expression here and say at the end, there's just allowed anything, which would then work the same. QFTest is clicking to options, regals, and then going to all the steps. I just changed all the mouse clicks to replaying as hard event that is a little bit better. Otherwise, it's way faster. Okay, and besides this, we go to this engine mask here to show this scope approach. Like for example, here we have a first name field, and also here down here we have a first name field. If I record something now, since we also have a recording mode in here, right now we have this hash up here, and this is just because in the record menu I can switch or toggle if I want to use normal recording or SmartID recording, then this icon is changing. It's just introduced with 7.1. The recording of SmartIDs was also available with QFTest 7, so we can already record it on your side. It's just not displayed visually up here. And if I click this and then, for example, click in here and enter Thomas, it's recording me mouse click, text field, left equals first name. This one I will explain a bit afterwards. So basically I could also remove this and just have the first name in there, something like this. So this is then working the same. And if I want to enter the value in here, which is also just first name, because the text field first name is matching this one, it probably will also match this one. If I record it here and put in the name of my coworker and stop recording, then it will look like this. QFTest is recording text fields, left equals, and then first name, and then it putting in the index at the end, because QFTest finds out there's more than one of this text fields with this criteria first name. But I wouldn't recommend to use this index in here because it's, again, error prone. If the developers switch the customer address in the invoice address dialogues and you just relying on this index, it may be entered in the wrong part of your application. So simply let's remove this. And in this case, go for the already talked about scope. And here in this field, I can simply say I want to set a scope, and the scope I want to set on some panel. And the panel, for example, is invoice address. And I'm gonna put it in here. And simply hit OK. Then we see up here in the tree, we get this scope icon, which tells us that there's some specific scope set. We can even go here and do a right click and say, I want to highlight my scope component, which is basically then looking for this panel invoice address and highlighting the scope. So inside this blue part, which we have seen here, QFTest is looking for the component. And now without any index, we see here already the highlighting. And if I replay this, it's putting the one in the correct one. So with the scopes, I can say I want to enter it in this specific part, I want to enter it in this specific part, which gives you a bit more flexibility. It even speeds up object recognition because then QFTest is just searching for this text field first name inside of this invoice address panel. And one additional information on this, imagine you have some other fields in here like the city. And if you put it in like this, and for example put in here Munich, then this is working as expected. The only thing with this is right now I have the scope set in each and every of the actions, which it's also some maintenance effort. If there's something changing later on, what you could do is simply cut this out here and also remove this here, and simply go to the sequence up here and say entering data in invoice address, something like this. Well, this is the name of my sequence, and I can say I want to set this scope for the sequence. So basically this scope I'm defining here is valid for each and every of the steps inside of the sequence. So with this, I can move the scope definition a bit more up, and I don't need to take care about each and every of the steps in there. All the steps are then using this predefined scopes up here. We can even nest this together, like put some subsequences below it where we need to define some other scopes, stuff like this, which may also possible depending on your needs.
Yes.
Basically, we have introduced some new capabilities in QFTest 7. The first one I explained already. Basically, recording SmartIDs was already supported with older versions of QFTest. The addition is that we have now some visual display in the QFTest itself. We also made some optimization because there were some problems with some components which were not recorded correctly, which are now working as expected. So that we did a lot of like improvements in the background, which are hard to describe as release notes or anything like this. And we additionally put this extended options in the Windows, in the options dialog of QFTest, where we have specific part for QFTest, for SmartID and QFS label. We have here the toggle for whether it's SmartID recording or the traditional recording. And those ones are here quite important because they save you a lot of time, like to always record the class for the SmartID in front of your actual criteria, and also record the qualifier for the SmartID in front of it. We have seen it already in the recordings I did, and basically the classes, whether it's a button, text field, whatever, and the qualifier is which attribute you want to use to identify your component. And this attributes, you can even like set a priority for it. Like, for example, if you want to rely on the labels first, and then just if there's no label found with it, rely on the feature. And if there's no feature found with specific ones, rely on the label. if you have an application where there is a lot of names set and those names are kind of unique, you can simply switch this priority here and put name in front of it, which is also the default, not a screenshot here, but is the default with QFTest 7. So basically, if you do some recording, then QFTest is recording the action on the component, and as SmartID, it's creating an qualifier for the name. If there's no name found for the component, it just goes to the second priority and picking up this one to store some qualifier in your recording. And following with the third one, you can simply customize this to your needs. The maximum length is the one I said. If the, let's say, SmartID gets too complex, then QFTest is automatically recording the normal component or traditional component. This you can influence with this parameter here. This one is just some convenience one because we introduced some new syntaxes, how to address subcomponents of components. With this flag, you can simply say you want to use this new syntax, not just for the SmartID itself, but also for addressing subcomponents inside of components, like, for example, table cells in a table or tree nodes in a tree, stuff like this. It's also switched on by default, so normally you don't need to modify anything in this settings here at all. There might be some tweaks for the priority and stuff, but for, let's say, 80-90% of all the applications, this should be fitting to your needs. And one other large improvement, which was the question about beforehand, is the new QFS label mechanism. We had this feature already in older versions of QFTest where we stored and connected label to a component. For example, the label next to a text field was then stored as a label for the text field. This was also working quite good, but we had some issues with some components where this was not that optimal. There were some wrong values picked up, or even for other components, it was not working at all. So therefore, we decided to completely revamp this feature and rewrite it from scratch, more or less, which gives us a lot of more possibilities even to influence this mechanism. So what is this mechanism about? It's basically the automatic recognition of associated labels for components. In this case, down here, we have this -5% button, which is in our application, which is basically just this button here. And for this button, if I simply would record a click with traditional recording, we can see here all information which gets recorded. We get the class name of the component, the ID which the developer set, also the class which is representing the HTML tag. We get the generic class QFTest is relying on, whether it's a button, a text field, a combo box, whatever. And then also we get this QFS label attributes stored down here, which tell QFTest, okay, this button has some text label which is located on the button itself, so it's this -5%. It also has a button on the left side which is discount, and it also has a label on the top left side of the component. So it's up here, which would be accessory price. For bring up the browser once again. So basically we're talking about this one. It would have the -5% on the button, and it would have the discount here on the left side, and on the top left side, it would have accessory price. So all of those are taken into account. And in this case, since it's obviously the best label for this button, QFTest is also setting this label best, which tells the user which out of all these labels we were using to identify this button in the best way. So this is then -5%, and this is then here automatically set to should match. So QFTest is then taking this value as the default to find the button. You can completely customize this for each and every of your component. It gives you like a lot of ways to tell this label is not really matching, I want to rely on another one. Then we can simply switch it to another one. And QFTest is trying to determine the best matching label to a component and storing this as QFS label best, as I already said. and we can use any other description necessary on the component. So if we look to the samples here, the basic one would be down here, like we have, for example, a button, and the button has a text minus 5% on it. The percent is escaped here by the backslash because it's a special character. So there's no special syntax in here. So this would be the default one. Also up here, button text equals okay, would be just the text on the button. But I can also say I want to address a text field, and the text field should have, on the left side, should have discount. Or I want to address a text field which has a label on top of it with the label vehicle name. This would also work, and which brings us to this table here, where we have several possibilities how we can set some label, depending on which component it's on there, depending also if it's a web application, where we have this label 4 here, for example, where the developers can associate a label with some input field or something like this. So QFTest is taking this 4 attribute out of the DOM structure and directly assigning this to a label. The others are more or less easy, like label left, label top, label right, label bottom, label top left. We even have some specialities like label inherited, I'll show on the next page. We can also say I want to rely on the tooltip of a component. For example, it's image or whatever. I can say I want to rely on the icon description of this image, which is then displayed as an alternative text, something like this. I can also use a placeholder, which may be displayed in a text field. We have several possibilities, there are even more in here. And on the right side, there's just some samples, like if I want to rely on this button with the text, that's just text equals minus 5%. If I want to rely on the label on the left side, it's just discount, left equals discount, and here, this entry field has the vehicle name on top. So basically it's just top equals vehicle name. It's just skipped up here, but it's just in my presentation. There should be a vehicle name. And as I said, this is all of them are either position labels or other types. Position labels are the most common ones, let's say. I have a top left, top right label, and the green one, it's supposed to be my component. I can say I want to identify or address this via the right label, the left label, whatever is matching the best. You can simply decide on your side what you put in the SmartID syntax. And we also have inherited labels where I can say I have here, for example, label, then with the label address, for example, and then you have zip code, city, and then street, something like this. And in older versions, this label would be just associated to the first field, and those other boths would have no label set at all. And with this version now, you can simply say I want to address this field via the address label on the left side, because all of them are connected to each other. So this mechanism or approach gives you more precise capabilities for specifying your recognition criteria. And these algorithms we are using for each and every of those labels can even be customized via resolvers. So each and every label you can modify to your needs. And even if this is not enough, we have various options for adapting this algorithm. Down here you have a screenshot. It's not that readable on your side, but it's just some internal documentation on our side, some internal documentation where we have a lot of, let's say, 20 to 30 hidden options in QFTest, which we can use to customize this label algorithm completely to your needs. You can define how far a label is allowed to be next to a text field, for example, like this, or even some priorities or some classes which need to match together. There are a lot of possibilities. So if you run into any issues and find out your label is not matching completely to your needs, just drop us a mail and support at QFSDE, and we will be happy to assist you on this. We have some additional ones, like we can define a label border, for example, in a web application. You can define for a component, you can define a label border, which is supposed to be the blue one here. So the green one could be your component. You define a label border class around it, and then QFTest, if it's trying to determine the labels, it would just take the two orange ones into account, because this one is outside of the border you defined. And this one here is also not valid because it has its own border defined around it. So with this, you can even like tweak which component is taking this into account. This one by default would be let's say the best label because it's more or less close to this one. But since it has an own border defined, it's not really used for this.